Okay guys, I'm going to tell you what's going on right now. Chris the student has volunteered to have his game critiqued by me. It's currently 1:29 in the afternoon. That means that I've just had lunch, I've been up early, my third cup of coffee hasn't kicked in yet. This is grumpy o'clock for myself. This is a very brave move by Chris, and we are going to absolutely slay him today. We're going to tear his game to smithereens at 50 zoom. Let's rip him apart. So we begin the session with a nice cup of coffee being thrown in our face. Okay, maybe it was meant to go down our ridiculously shocked open mouth there, but it looked like it just got thrown in our face. Not the best way, not the ideal start to a session. Things can only get better from here. We have ace-5 in the small blind. We open jack-10-9. This is the kind of board I would definitely have a fairly liberal betting range on, which means that you will have higher EV bluffs like Queen X, 8X, King X, things like that. Ace Queen, Ace King. You will also have some lower EV bluffs, I believe. I don't think Ace-5 is a very good hand. It's definitely one of the worst hands in your range. That doesn't necessarily eliminate it from being one of your flop c-bet bluffs. It would do if the board was really bad for your range, but I think Jack-10-9 is actually high enough that you can be fairly free here to c-bet hands that have an overcard at some frequency and not worry about it too much. Yes, you are out of position, but this is the kind of board that is fitting for your range. Villain does not have king, queen, jacks, 10s, 9s, or even 2-pair, anything like the frequency that you do. He doesn't have any overpair plus straight draw like you do, so I think you can do a ton of betting here, and for that reason, probably even hands like ace-5 are going to get in there sometimes, especially without a diamond. I think the diamonds are obviously the bad suit that unblock the continues and block the folds in Villain's range. So this is interesting. We turn an ace, and we check really quickly to our opponent here. This is fine if you're only playing an overbet strategy, but if you are mixing some smaller bets into your range here, then you're going to want to block bet sometimes with ace-x. So I think we can go ahead and build a smaller bet here as well as a bigger one. It's not just the nut region that I want to be betting here. I want to be betting some of my king-jack, queen-jack, ace-x, and therefore I build a 33% pot size bet on the turn as well as a bigger one into my inventory here. We check quickly, which is it's a bit concerning maybe because it possibly just means that we've not put enough thought into having a small bet in this spot. But if Chris knows he doesn't have a small bet here, then who am I to argue? I guess it's okay to just play overbets here as well. Wouldn't be my choice. On the river, our hand is very good. Clearly, it has some interesting blockers here. I think the overbet makes a lot of sense with this hand because while conventionally you don't want to be blocking like 2 cards on the board when you're overbetting the river for value, you'd rather have like a set or a straight or something like that. When we've checked all the way to the river and reached this spot in such a passive way, and so is our opponent, it's much more likely that the kind of hands in his range that call an overbet here are actually things like 10x, 9x, jack-x. There'll be a bit of ace-x in there as well, but I don't think the 5 is going to be such a common candidate for calling an overbet, so I don't think it matters too much that we block that. I do think that the 5 blocks hands he would call to smaller sizes though, so I think checking here is probably okay and mixing some slow play with this hand and check raise, but I would be worried that pool is just going to take showdown too often here with something like king high, under pair, not be doing enough bluffing, and therefore I would prefer just making a nice big bet like we do here. So well played hand by Chris, definitely not put a foot wrong here in terms of EV mistakes, but I think possibly the turn range construction could do with a bit of thought. In this next hand we have king 9 of hearts. We go for an open in the cutoff against our nemesis, slightly younger Chris. Note that we are Chris 93 and he is Chris 96. This guy has 3 years on us in terms of agility, mental versatility and optimism, but we have 3 years with advantages in our favor such as bitterness, lack of bladder control due to being older, grumpiness, and experience. We're also a veteran of the game, right? So all of these things from being 3 years older than this Chris are going to be good, but we have to understand there's some weaknesses here going on as well. We check back the flop this time. I think that's totally fine. 9-6-5 is a board I'd be playing a very high check frequency on, especially against human beings, because human beings don't lead this flop like a solver will. A solver will build like a 30-40% lead range on this board, especially the rainbow variant, which is very good for big blind because the straights are not being interfered with by those pesky flush draws. So straights, 2 pairs sets are quite a good concentration of big blind's range, at least more so than nutted hands normally are. So he should be leading the flop. When he doesn't lead the flop, we should be checking back an absolute ton in response. So I like the flop check. When we face this bet on the turn, this probe bet, this is called, guys, we don't want to be doing any raising here at all. We want to be playing call only when we continue. And the reason for that is that our opponent has polarized massively with this bet. Okay, not massively, but he has a polarized range now. We're in position, and we've also capped our range on the flop, so those three reasons mean that there's just not much urgency to try and shovel loads of money into the pot at this point. Just calling is totally fine, and we can allow villain to continue bluffing river, continue value betting river, and because of the magic of position, we can always bet when check to. Villain goes for a big bet here. God damn it, younger Chris, why do you always have a slightly better hand than me? You see, younger Chris with the ace-9 just has an edge on older Chris. What are you going to do? Well, that was a good hand by Chris. I really liked it. I thought it was a very thoughtful hand. Checking back flop, high frequency, bluff catching, turn and river. Not really anything I can critique there. Unfortunate, because I want to tear his game to shreds. Let's find more spots. Guys, I'm really happy, but I'm also really sad. I'm sad because this April is going to be the last chance that you have to set our live university style experience of the Carrot Poker School. After that, the school is going to be switching from a live format to a slick professional video course, which will be on sale at carrotcorner.com. This April, I'll be teaching each grade in 2 hours only. Each class will be going from 3 PM to 5 PM UK time, Monday to Friday, which is the same thing as 10 AM to 12 PM Eastern time, or 7 AM to 9 AM Pacific time. Grade 1 is going to be running from the 11th to the 15th of April, Grade 2 will run from the 18th to the 22nd, and Grade 3 will be the final week of the month from the 25th to the 29th of April. Signing up for the Carrot Poker School takes just a few button clicks. Simply head on over to carrotcorner.com and select the grade that you want to take. Or alternatively, why not set our entire full scholarship experience and save £500 while you're at it? If you're not sure which grade to take, you can always get in touch with me on Discord. Just add me there as Carrots #9127. If you do sign up for the school, do the same thing, add me there, and you'll be added to our Carrot Poker Discord server and become part of the community. Let's see if we get to do some criticizing this time. Ace-10 offsuit. Don't worry, I don't actually live for criticizing my students. I'd rather they just played really well. But then what would they be paying me for? This guy has gone ahead and opened and called our 3-bet, the audacity. We have flopped nothing, and this is the part of our range that wants to check flop incredibly often. Both Ace-King, Ace-Queen, and Ace-9, Ace-8 are going to have higher bet frequencies than Ace-10. Ace-10 and Ace-Jack are what we call the median, that's M-E-D-I-A-N, median of our range, the part that just isn't going to be polarized enough to do much betting. Villain bets 1/3 on the turn. We do have to defend an incredibly high amount of our range, a large amount of our range I should say, against this bet size, but I'm not sure that this hand is really going to make it in there. We can definitely just call any hands with 2 clubs. We can call Ace-King, Ace-Queen, Ace-Jack before this. We can call... It's not even clear that King-Queen isn't a better call than this, because I think the 10 is blocking more bluffs, and also King-Queen has 2 overs to a hand like 10s or Jacks, whereas Ace-10 does not. So I think this one can probably just go in the muck all of the time. We do want to be careful that we don't start folding everything against this, but I think you're allowed to fold like the absolute worst ace-high possible that you can really have here. Okay, you have Ace-8 sometimes and stuff, but yeah, I think this one could probably just always go in the bin. It's close, but I think it's a fold. We do call. If villain checks this King River, we are going to be in the classic situation of strong range, weak hand. This hand is therefore now a mandatory bluff. It's very low down our range. Our range is stronger than his. He's not meant to be trying to meet the mathematical defense frequency on that river. Rather, he's meant to just be folding lots. And the reason for that is that he has arrived there by polarizing slightly and then checking. And that combination of actions in GTO is very weakening. Our range, meanwhile, has condensed by calling turn. We folded the bottom of it, or so we should have, and therefore in the river we're meant to not have a ton of air. We're not calling the turn bet with the naked Jack-10 of spades, for example. Right, maybe Ace-10's an okay call, I don't know, but having got to the river with it, I would be for sure just tempted to turn all of my hands worse than Ace-10 or Ace-Jack, sort of reaching into a bluff here. The fold equity we're getting is going to be very high. Therefore, I think we probably get folds the vast majority of the time on the river, maybe 65-70% of the time, something like that. So very profitable bluff. It's profitable to check as well, because we win sometimes, but it's even more profitable to bluff. Ace-7 we get cold called, we get a 3-way pot on King Queen deuce. We do have the ace of spades here. That's going to allow us to bet sometimes. I would check everything if this board was a bit lower, and I might check everything if I actually had two opponents to act behind me. Because one of my opponents has already checked here, what I actually want to do is build a betting range, and I don't see a reason why for small sizing I couldn't include a hand like a7 with a live overcard and the backdoor flush draw. We do check this time. I'm not sure enough thought went into the betting decision here. Then on the turn we have a very clear bet in my mind. The reason for this is that in theory, this hand is a very good bluff, and again, we shouldn't just be bluffing 10x here. If we do that, we fall into the trap of building a linear betting range, rejecting lower down hands as bluffs and only bluffing 10x or a flush draw. The situation is so good for our range here that we don't want to fall into that trap, right? We're always talking about this in the Carrot Poker School, how range advantage is one of the first things you should always consider before you dive into how your combo wants to behave. The behavior of your exact hand is going to be incredibly dependent on how your range is handling the situation, how happy it is, its equity and its EV. Here again, the urgency to value bet if you have a value hand is relatively high because one of your opponents has checked twice, the other guy is going to be not going to be opening action here very often either, and so you have a range advantage, you have an okay bluffing hand, and you probably have a real life situation that is exploitatively much more conducive to fold equity than GTO is, because all of those tricky trappy slow plays are not really happening in our opponent's ranges here like they're supposed to be. In essence, they're meant to be checking a more protected range than they are effectively. Therefore, I think there's no decision here, you just have to go ahead and bet. There's even some denial here, because if one opponent has 6s and one has 5s, that's 4 outs that are out against your ability to bluff the river successfully. So you will have to bluff by the river anyway, and I like just betting that. You can also take an exploit here, such as just bet turn over bet river and expect it to rain fold equity massively. As long as you bet turn normally and then overbet river, I think you'll be doing incredibly well. You need to slow down on this river. When you river the Broadway straight here, and it only takes anyone else having an ace here before this is a chop, there becomes a real danger that when you start betting too big, you begin to push the calling regions of your opponent's ranges too heavily towards chops and away from hands that you beat. The idea here is that they need to be indifferent with some hands weaker than an ace. That means that they have to be incentivized to call with a 9 sometimes, to call with 2 pair. Against the sizing, they're just not. There's 2 of them. When there are 2 opponents, they half the burden of defense between one another. That means that each individual is not compelled to call anything really worse than an ace here, and you're just not meant to get bluff caught for this sizing. When you bet smaller here, the other bonus is that when you run into an ace, you have 0% fold equity. You run into an ace a lot more than you run into a 9, based on how pre-flop ranges are built, and therefore it doesn't make sense to bluff big here either. Your whole range is going to lose EV here by betting too large. Be careful. Here we've gone ahead and 3-bet queens in the small blind against hijack. We've got a flop of ace-jack 3, and we're going to go ahead and check. I don't mind this play at all, especially if villain is a recreational player whom you expect to play too passively or too aggressively against the check. Then you can go from there. Otherwise, I like just betting tiny here with range, betting quarter pot, something like that, and just proceeding to the next street. It doesn't matter whether you check immediately with queens and then bet small later, or bet small immediately and then check later. What's key here is that the hand does not go above its investment ceiling. If this hand over-invests, it will start to blunder EV, but while it's still investing just quarter pot at some point in the hand, that's totally fine. Of course, you don't want to bet this multiple times, but there's no problem betting it once and then checking. On the 10 turn, if you're not building a small bet here, and I know Chris's game enough to think that he's not doing that, then you probably just want to go ahead and check again. The Jack River is a bit of a shame, it's really devaluing your combo. Prior to this card coming, your hand had the ability to bet and get called by lots of second pair combos, such as Queen Jack, Jack 9 suited, and of course King Jack. Now those hands all beat you. The 10 is not very prolific in villain's range because he's just going to 4-bet or fold with a lot of 10x pre-flop. There's some that flats, but it's heavily blocked by both your hand and the board here. So normally villain's range is just a bit too polarized to either an ace or an underpair for you to bet successfully here. What's going to happen, even if you bet small, is you'll start to isolate yourself against too strong of a calling range, similarly to in the last spot. In this next one, we have the King 4 of clubs. We decide to open and get called by the cutoff. Villain then bets the flop when we procedurally check all of our range. The reason you want to check all of your range in this scenario is that you are out of position against a range that has a much higher set density and pocket pair density than your range has, and moreover, your range is drowning in abysmal combos like Ace-King offsuit that your opponent does not have. They are abundant enough in that offsuit format that they actually constitute a lot of your range, and although you do have some very strong hands in your range here, it would be a protocol mistake to only focus on them. You have to also concentrate on the fact that the bad hands in your range bring down your overall equity. When we have an equity disadvantage to an opponent and we're out of position to that opponent, we tend to check with everything. We also do this when we're in the big blind and we call a button raise and the flop comes king, king, 9. This is just the same thing. We're going to check with everything here. We're going to react accordingly. Fill-in bets, I would say that we're usually going to be calling here because we don't have a ton of check raises in this spot against a larger sizing. We do have some, so raise is definitely fine here, but I think I would go like 60-40 call in this situation, do a bit of raise. Definitely king 4 is a fine raise though. Having a semi-nutted draw that has limited showdown value is definitely a hand that you're happy aggressing with as well. On that note, when the turn comes to 7, while it's a really bad card for your range, your hand is just going to be doing pretty well as a bet. This is the sort of hand I might be a bit worried loses some EV as a check, just because it doesn't get to continue very frequently or very effectively against most bet sizes, and thereby you might just want to bet it and generate fold equity and make sure that you can invest. Your range overall here on the turn won't want to make a lot of check raises against villains more set heavy range that just favors this situation, and so you're going to want to mostly bet with a good but fragile flush draw here. I don't think the check is horrible. I think it could be an underfolded spot. We get to the river, we decide to give up. I'm a huge fan of this give up. I think betting river there is a big error against a weaker player because they're generally going to be underfolding to that kind of scattered aggression where you check raise flop, check turn, and then bet river. That's going to be an underfolded spot where you get looked up 70 to 75% of the time in a situation where any meaningful bet size will obviously need something like 40% fold equity. So you're just not getting the fold equity to make that bet. Here we pick up the Jack 10 offsuit in the cutoff, go ahead and make it 2.3, attract a call from big blind. What I would do here is outline how often I want to bet my range and then choose a sizing, then outline how often I want to bet my range and then decide how often my hand will bet relative to that global range betting frequency. I would imagine that on 10-4 deuce I'm probably able to bet 50 to 60% of my range in the cutoff for a big sizing like Chris uses here. He goes for a 75% pot size bet here, which is a good sizing on a board where we just retain a very large nut advantage and where many of our value combos crave that high investment ceiling. We go for the big bet, we attract the call. So far so good. I bet this hand around the frequency that I bet my range, maybe a bit higher. So if I'm betting range 50-55% at the time, I might bet this 65% at the time. Not a big deal. Frequencies don't magically give you all the EV. It's not like because you play the same frequency as the solver that magic beans grow in the soil and build a tree of money and all the money falls onto your lap. It doesn't work like that. You have to graft for EV by using your brain, not just trying to mimic frequencies. Frequencies don't actually give you any EV, they just make sure that your strategy is roughly protected and sensible and not obviously exploitable. If you mix different frequencies with different actions in a spot that is actually just only good to do one thing, you will however blunder EV, right? So it's worth knowing that. On the turn, I think you can probably just usually check. This is not a good card for your range. It's a card on which you want to have a low bet frequency. You have an okay 10 here. You're losing to a few too many 10s, I think, for this to be another bet. And I think on a more favorable turn like a deuce or something, it could be, or an 8. But not on a 6. River is a very standard bet check bet. The hand has now been re-promoted to a hand that's good enough to bet, and my sizing here would just be exactly like this, 75% pot. Chris is becoming a really strong poker player now in many situations because we've been working together on stream. He's been learning the toolkits and the formulae for playing spots that are taught by the Carrot Poker School, and he's effectively living his poker life by these doctrines now, and it's really beginning to pay off for Chris. He's only been playing poker for about a year, and thanks to this tuition and all of the hard work he's put in, and the hard work of his peers in the community helping him get stronger, he's already successfully beating 50 NL, pre-rake back, and surviving at 100 NL as well, which is really impressive for just playing for a year. Ace-9-6 betting range here is good. The king turn is one that we're going to want to go ahead and barrel a lot. It doesn't really matter what your hand is here as long as you don't have a hand like, I don't know, something that contained a blocker to backdoors really heavily or something like that. I don't think we block that many backdoors here. I guess a hand that might be bad to bet here is like the Queen 7 of clubs or the Queen 8 of spades or something. I think villain's main folds are sort of 6-8, 6-7, 7s, 8s, backdoor draws like Jack 10 of spades, that kind of thing. So having two really low innocuous cards here that don't block that folding range is going to be perfectly innocent and perfectly fine with which to bluff. So I think betting here is good. I would tend to think this turn is probably overfolded. Love the sizing, slight overbet's perfect here. You could even go for a larger overbet. When you do this, this is probably a pure bluff on the river in theory, because again, you're just unblocking a lot of folds. We snap check back. This is a procedural leak. I don't think for a second that just because villain calls a turn overbet means he's always calling river. People think like, oh, recreational players never folding river, or they get like confused in these spots. You're still supposed to be applying pressure here, and very big pressure. Your value region is going to be able to generate tons of EV by overbetting, like 2x potting that river or something like that. So you should also be building a very big size on the river. You can have a smaller size too for combos like ace queen, but most of your hands, maybe ace king, ace queen can go smaller because ace king blocks calling range and ace queen is weaker, but most of your hands on this river are going to just be able to go huge. If you have two pair as set, something like that, your main value hands, you're going to want to just go like 2x pot or something. And this is in accordance to a theorem in our poker school called Greed Theorem. Check out carrotcorner.com for the Carrot Poker School's April intake, and make sure you jump into our live classes while you still have the chance. These classes are considerably cheaper than they were before, and this is the last month it's going to run before switching over to a video format course, as I said. So let's have a look at one more spot before we wrap up today's session. Pocket nines here in the hijack, we go for the 2.3 and we attract a 3-bet. I think a small frequency of 4-betting is totally fine here. The fold equity will generate is a very useful thing for a pair of nines. It's quite vulnerable, and we can be in okay shape when villain flats. It does suck to get jammed on, but that doesn't happen all that frequently. This is a fold, and only a fold I believe, because Queen 10-4 is a horrific board in this configuration. It's just too early composition for you to want to make this flop call. Your hand is not only completely annihilated by the hands that beat it, but it's also drawing not to the nuts anymore with its two setouts, which are important for call to be plus EV here, as King Jack will destroy it on a 9 turn, but more importantly, the hand is not even that far ahead when it is ahead. So if you're ever out of position with a hand that's either completely annihilated or just a reasonable amount of being ahead, that's not going to be a profitable spot for continuing, even when you're getting 4-1. We do fold the turn, but I think we could have folded the flop. That would have been an improvement. Overall, from watching this video, my tips to Chris would be take a bit more time before auto-checking. Do you have a bit of a unhealthy check reflex in certain spots? And overall though, really happy with this play, definitely improving a lot and thriving at these stakes. This has been P. Clark. For more of our content, you know where to go, it's carrotcorner.com. I really appreciate it if you guys will smash that like button, leave a little comment below and let me know what you thought of the format, and we'll see you on another video very soon. Bye for now guys, and good luck at the tables.